Hi, everyone. My name is Kimber Grayson, and I am the Study Abroad Specialist and also the founder of the Live, Study, Learn Abroad Association. And today I'm going to be talking to you about study abroad budgets. I have had so many questions about this. Even though at this time a lot of people are not studying abroad, they just want to hear more about how to get started with setting up a budget for their study abroad and some of the things that they should think about. So in this short webinar, we're just going to walk through it and sort of talk through some of the key touch points that you need to think about when you're setting up a study abroad budget. So welcome to the Budget Wisely and Live Smartly Abroad webinar. Now, just to point out right off the bat, if you are someone that is a visual person, feel free to look at your screen and follow along. But if you want to listen in the background while you're doing something else, I'm also going to include the slides linked in the description box. So feel free to consume this however you want to. So we're going to start off by just thinking about what we're going to cover for this webinar. So we're starting off with the basics of study abroad budgeting. So if you've come to this webinar or you're at least searching study abroad, not only are you interested in it, but you may have already started the process of applying, and you may just be interested in thinking about how you're going to tackle the money piece. We're just going to talk about some of the basics of study abroad budgeting. Then we're going to dive into how to create a budget that works for you. So of course, I don't know everyone's situation out there, but just in thinking about how I have advised students in the past, I know that there are certain touch points that every student kind of thinks about and certain things they may need to factor into their budget. So we're going to talk about a little bit of that. And then we're also going to dive into the common issues that face study abroad students when it comes to budgeting. So there are certain pitfalls that you can fall into, whether, on purpose or inadvertently. And I want you to kind of stay away from those. So we're going to talk about those a little bit. And then last but not least, I'm going to just show you a template that I usually share with my members club, but I'm just going to show you kind of a snapshot of that just to give you an idea of what a sample template could look like for you for budgeting. So in thinking about the basics of study abroad budgeting, there are certain things that you definitely want to factor in as you begin creating a budget for study abroad for your program. So the very first one that I would say is that you kind of need to be aware of what is happening in the country that you are planning to go to. So your host country, your future host country, you need to be aware of what is going on there. So kind of researching specifically the economic conditions of what is happening there, be aware of that. In terms of the other basics for study abroad budgeting, you also need to think about, determining each source of funding for your study abroad semester. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Then you're going to move into creating a starter baseline budget. So this is kind of where you're going to be at when you depart. And then, of course, as you get into your program, you get settled into your new place. You can always change it up a little bit. Then you need to definitely be realistic about unexpected events. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you can plan for that in your budget. And also just thinking about how you can connect your budget to your priorities and your goals for your semester way, because that looks different for everyone. So starting off with researching local economic conditions. So this is something that traditionally people do not teach in study abroad kind of advisement. I know that when I was first kind of getting started back in 2007, the very first time I studied abroad, no one was talking about this. And it kind of was important because a year later, everything kind of crashed. But it's something that is very wise to do. So in thinking about specifically the economics for your host country, so the country you are planning to travel to, here are a few things to consider. So number one, you want to think about the strength versus the weakness of the currency. So you want to think about the strength and the weakness of the currency that you currently use and the strength and the weakness of the currency of the host country. So in most cases, that is going to be different. Now, if you happen to be in a very small sliver of people that, let's say you're going to be studying within, like, let's say you're on the British pound and you're going to a place that they use the British pound, or you're within the EU somewhere and you're just going to a different EU country. I mean, you can just be aware of it on kind of a granular scale, but most people, they're going to be traveling to a different country where there's a different currency. So you definitely want to be aware of what that looks like. And part of the reason for that is because even though you don't have a magic wand, you can't kind of figure out what's going to happen. You need to sort of be able to pre-predict for financial instability. And so it's like, have you been reading things and it says this country is, headed for a recession or a depression, or, has something recently happened? Now, obviously, as I'm recording this video, we are all kind of in this weird global space economically, and certain countries are doing better than others. So you'll have to think about it as you move forward. It, will hopefully look a little bit different. But has something happened where it could lead to that? So you need to consider that strongly. Also, too, things surrounding inflation that could also impact you, because maybe you were budgeting for a certain amount, and once you get there, food is going to cost more, rent may cost more, clothing may cost more. There's all different things that happen when economic stability is in the mix. Related to economic conditions, you need to think about, are there significant political shifts that are going to either happen before you get there, after you arrive? So that also impacts different things in terms of budgeting and economic conditions. So for example, here in the US, we just had quite a big political shift, as we do every 4 years. And so that always has a bit of a shift in the market, pandemic aside. So you need to just kind of be aware of that, like, no matter what country you're going to, are they having an election coming up? Is there going to be some type of situation where there could be political unrest? And be aware of what's going on in the country that you are headed towards. You also need to think about the relationship with your home country and the host country, because that often has a lot of economic ramifications. So if you are going to a country that is an ally country, then you won't need to worry. Or you won't need to worry as much. So for example, when I first went to the UK in 2007, I wasn't as stressed about it, because obviously the UK and the US are, longtime allies and have a very strong relationship. But if I was traveling to a country like Russia, and this was before Russian sanctions and everything like that were put on them by the US, that can impact economic conditions. And so you just need to be aware of that. Just, you don't have to stress over it, but you just want to be aware of what that looks like for your particular host country and your home country. And last but not least, sort of related to the political shifts, but it could also just be related to policy, any types of change in education policy. So is there going to be a new standardized test that is recommended for study abroad students, or are they going to suddenly tie that to immigration? Like, there are all different things that happen sometimes suddenly, and that impacts not only your ability to go study, but also the economic climate. So be aware of those things. So the next thing to think about is where you're going to get the money. So where is this money coming from? So in terms of the funding, just kind of thinking about some of the common sources here. Obviously, we know that our parents and family are kind of our main source. And I would say that in my experience personally, and also through friends and people I know and people that I've advised over the years, I would say around 80% of people, usually they get most of their funding for study abroad from their parents or their family. But a lot of students also rely on scholarships, or they get lucky enough to win full scholarships to study abroad. So that is a great thing as well. And again, like, a lot of your funding is going to depend on what type of program you're doing. So if you've had a chance to check out my free e-guide, which is also linked down in the description box, where I actually go through the 3 common different types of study abroad programs. Sometimes, depending on what type you're doing, you may have access to more funding than others. So for example, if you are doing a short-term, what we usually call a short-term, short stay program that's through your own university, a lot of times you can just use whatever financial aid or whatever scholarships you already have for that particular study abroad semester. But if you're going to be doing an independent program where, let's say, you're planning to earn a degree abroad, fully on your own, you may have to go searching for that, and you may not be as lucky in finding full scholarships. You may find partial scholarships. It really just depends. But that is a common source for students, depending on where they're studying as well. Student loans and student finance are also an option. So depending on what country you're going to, you may be able to either apply for student loans or student finance either in your home country, or you can do it once you get to your host country. It really just depends on where you're going and also what you're studying as well. There are also potential sponsorship. So sometimes depending on, let's say if a country is trying to get more students to come in for a particular subject area where their home students have not really taken a interest in that, but they know there's a lot of international demand, they may be willing to sponsor you. So definitely always stay out on the lookout for that. And then there's also local bursaries as well. So this is not as common in the US, but particularly in Canada and parts of the UK and in Europe, there are lots of different local organizations that will either give scholarships or give some type of grant or something like that. And depending on what you're studying, it could be for your full amount of tuition. So definitely look into those. So the questions that you must be able to answer when it comes to your study abroad budget, these are kind of the top ones, at least for me and for the students that I've been working with. So you definitely want to think about what types of expenses are you going to have while abroad. And of course, you don't know everything that you're going to have, but we're going to talk a little bit about some of the basics that you're going to have. You want to know the method of how you're going to be receiving your funding. So you want to know, is it going to be deposited directly into your bank? Is it going to be sent to the school if it's a loan and then they add it to your account? Like, how are you going to be getting that money? If you are using a student loan specifically, when are the payments released? So oftentimes, I know at least here in the US, it's probably similar in other parts of the world too, where if you have a student loan or you're using student financing, it is often not released in one lump sum. So it's usually on a schedule. And so you're going to need to figure out, like, how does that schedule of when the money is released match up to when the tuition is due? And if it is not matched up, does the school at least know like when it's coming so that they don't charge you for late fees? Or same thing if you are using it to pay for your housing or however that's going to work based on your particular program, has that been communicated in writing specifically? Moving on to the next point, you definitely want to have these details in writing. So you want to have an outline, some way, somehow, of either your bank, or even if it's just your mom and dad saying, we're going to be depositing this in so and so's bank at this time, just so that you have it in writing, you have a little bit more backup. Than just kind of saying, well, I thought it was going to come at this time and then it's not there. If you have it in writing, that's going to be kind of your security to move things forward in the process, especially if something goes wrong. And then also too, you want to think, are there any additional fees that you need to consider? So there often are, and we'll talk a little bit about that when I get into the banking portion, but there sometimes are additional fees that you need to think about. Enjoying this webinar? Unfortunately, right now it's a little too long for YouTube, but go ahead and click the link in the description box to head on to my website and view the rest. We'll see you real soon.